It has become increasingly easy to obtain things you cannot afford. A young professional could furnish their entire apartment instantly and suffer the pain of monthly installments and interest later. There is a growing culture of instant gratification, of why wait if I can have it now, of I want it, thus I must have it. Very few people stop to consider whether they can actually afford the things they desire when they desire them. Caution is most truly abandoned in the excitement of year-end bonuses and salary increases that is coming up. Many, while feeling flush for a moment, will be more vulnerable to falling for enticing deals. Evidence that this must-have now attitude is spreading is reflected in a 2011 University of Botswana study on credit usage, higher purchase costs, and consumer protection in retail institutions in Botswana. That references the fact that consumer debt levels and non-business bankruptcy trends indicate that consumers are increasingly getting overcommitted and overly dependent on credit to supplement their consumption patterns. And just last month, the International Monetary Fund specifically warned Botswana on increasing household debt, an indication that finding oneself overcommitted and heavily in debt does not only cause the individual pain and stress, but may have wider economic implications. The prodigal use of credit is often partly through carelessness and partly through ignorance. We at First Issues are staunchly committed to educating consumers on matters of finance and frequently partner with those working to address this dangerous dearth of knowledge in this area. And in keeping with these mores, we followed regular contributors, Consumer Watchdog, as they went on a mission to educate the younger generation on a most commonly used but frequently misunderstood form of credit: hire purchase. Because it is not just the younger generation that need to be giving an understanding as to what exactly they are agreeing to when they sign along that dotted line. But a large segment of older consumers are clearly yet to learn their lesson. Welcome to First Issues. Welcome back to First Issues. In the next few weeks, we will be exploring the mire of legal and ethical questions raised by hire purchase processes in Botswana. For our first installment, we will be showing the enlightening footage we recorded last Wednesday, having followed members of the advocacy group Consumer Watchdog as they went to educate Westwood school children on what they say is the true cost of hire purchase. Richard Harriman gave a detailed description of the laws protecting Botswana consumers, before presenting on the questionable mathematics and processes many stores use when selling to customers on credit.
Let's talk about buying on credit. Now, you may see, if ever you look in the newspapers, you'll see those little inserts from furniture stores and from Hi-Fi Corporation and Incredible Connection and so on. You can go buy things, but they very often say available on credit as well. Now, there are various ways of buying in that way. There's credit, there's hire purchase, there's all sorts of ways of deferring payment. Doesn't matter, it's all basically the same. The idea is that you get your goods today. You can get your sound system, you can get your laptop, you can get your sofa, get your new refrigerator. You can get it today, but you pay over a period. And those periods vary. Sometimes it's only 3 months. Sometimes, more often it's a year or 2 years. Sometimes it's 3 years. The problem with store credit is that it's staggeringly expensive, overwhelmingly expensive. Now, what I want to do is try and illustrate to you quite how expensive it can be. And I'm going to use the example, and this is based on, the figures I'm showing here are real figures, based on, I don't know how many hundreds of times we've heard from people who've had problems when you buy things on credit. Now, I should say there's nothing wrong with borrowing money. Every one of you, unless your parents are billionaires, you're going to have to borrow at some point. When you buy a car, none of us can really afford to buy a car for cash. None of us, well, billionaires can. With the exception of billionaires, no one can afford to buy a house for cash. We have to borrow money to buy our houses. We have to borrow money to get our cars, usually. But why? You shouldn't have to borrow money to buy a chair to sit on or a laptop computer. I'll try and explain why. Let's talk about some numbers. And let's take an example of furniture, because it's usually furniture that causes the problem. But let's talk about furniture. And let's talk about an example. And these figures, as I say, are roughly correct. Let's say the cash price of something is about 3,000 pula. It's a sofa and a couple of chairs. If you're buying it on credit or hire purchase over, let's say, 2 years, you'll probably pay about twice the cash price. So if you walked in with cash, you might pay 3,000 pula. You want to buy it on credit over 2 years, almost exactly you'll pay about 6,000 pula. So twice the price. But maybe you think, okay, maybe it's worth it because I don't have 3,000 pula. But what's 6,000 pula over 2 years each month? I think it's 250 pula a month. You can afford 250 pula a month. You don't have 3,000 in cash. So you might be tempted. You think, okay, maybe it's worth it. But let's go through how this works. And I'll make it slightly dramatic. In month 0, the thing that was worth 3,000 pula cash, 6,000 credit price, you still owe 6,000. You haven't paid anything yet. You still owe 6,000 pula. And over the next 2 years, you're going to pay it off. So after 6 months, your balance has gone down by a quarter. You now owe 4.5. So far, so good? Okay. So you're getting there. You've paid a quarter of it off. After another 6 months, you've paid off another quarter. You're down to half. You still owe the same amount as the cash price. It's 3,000 pula cash. You still owe 3,000 a year later. But at least you have a sofa. You've been sitting on something for a year. But then things go wrong. Normally, with a little luck, you'll keep on paying that off every month, and after 2 years, it'll be fine. You'll be free of debt, but you'll have a 2-year-old sofa that the cat has weed on, and you've spilt coffee on, and the dog has chewed, and it's just a bit worn. But what happens very, very, very often for people who can just afford 250 pula a month is something bad happens. They lose their job. The economy goes bad, and their salary is cut. They don't have any more overtime. Or they suddenly have another debt. They crash their car and they need more money to buy a new car. Things happen. Bad things happen during those 2 years. So what happens? You stop paying. Because you don't have the money. Well, of course you should be paying, but you don't have the cash. You can't pay that 250 a month, every month. So what happens is repossession happens. In the contract you signed a year ago, in clause 37b, it says, if you stop paying, we're coming to collect it. They all say that. They don't have to give you warning. They don't even have to go to court. Because you signed in the contract, you can come to my house and you can take it if I stop paying. You don't need to get a sheriff, a deputy sheriff in. You don't need the cops. They'll just come and take it away. And one of the things you also find is that when you originally signed the contract, they will insist on delivering it. Kate and I were in the store and we asked about a TV, fairly small TV. And we were stringing them along. We said, well, we don't need it delivered. We've got a car. We can take it home ourselves. No. No, we have to deliver it. And we'll charge you 300 pula to deliver it. We said, we don't want to, we can just take it. No. We don't trust you. We want to know where you live. And why do they want to know where you live? So they know where to come to repossess it. In the contract, it also says, if you move, you've got to tell them. Scandalous. Anyway, it's repossessed. They take the sofa away. Then where are you? Well, you don't have a sofa. And they take it away. And what do? They auction it. That second-hand sofa that's now a year old, they can't sell it as new because new means new. They take it back to their store and they sell it at auction. Now, we're not talking about a public auction. We're talking about typically an auction within the store. One of the few reasons to work in a furniture store is there's a bonus mechanism they often have, which is you can get the repossessed goods from the customers cheaply. So they bring in a sofa, they don't want to keep it, they can't do anything with it. They say, do you want it? 200 pula. What are you going to offer me? He's offering 300, he can have it. And we are talking about that sort of amount of money. A fraction of the cash price is normally what someone inside pays for it. But what they do, the store, because they're nice people, they knock that money they got off the amount you owe, because you still owe that money. But they're not going to sell it for 3,000 because it's a year old. And you've been sitting on it for a year and you spilt coffee on it. It's not worth 3,000 anymore. They sell it for maybe, I'd say 500. You still owe that amount of money. Let's say it's 2,500 now. You still owe 2,500 pula and you don't have a sofa. There's an empty space in your sitting room. Or your TV's gone. Or you have no laptop anymore. The item has been repossessed, but you still owe money. But then what happens is you forget. And this is the thing we hear about all the time. They repossessed my sofa and that was 6 months ago and that's fine. It's in the past. It's gone. It's dealt with. I can forget about it now. Nope. That's when life becomes horrible. Because you still owe that money. 6 months later, a year later, depends how long the furniture store takes to hire a debt collector and start sending threatening letters and visiting your house because they know where you live. You still owe that amount of money. But it gets worse. Because in the 6 months since, they've applied penalties on top. Because you signed a contract saying you'd pay penalties. They've added interest on, because you owe them 2,500 pula. There's another 500, 1,000 they owe you. You owe them rather. And then you have to pay for the debt collector, because you signed in the agreement that you would. So 6 months later, you owe almost as much as the total credit amount you were going to pay. You owe more now than the cash price 18 months ago of that sofa that you don't have anymore. But let's look at the economics of it. That's what you now owe, for, let's say 5,000. For something that's worth 3,000 18 months ago, for which you were going to pay 6,000, you still owe 5,000, roughly. But your business studies, you do economics. Let's look at the economics of this. It was never worth 3,000 pula. It was never worth 3,000 pula. It was worth half that. Because look underneath, it's made of cheap rubbish wood held together with staples. If they sell it for cash at 3,000, they're making a hefty profit. I'm not sure it's exactly 1,500, but maybe it's 2,000. But they're making profit on a cash sale. So it was never worth 3,000. So something, let's say it was worth 1.5. You now have 5,000 for something that's worth 1.5 that you don't even have anymore. Dreadful. Terrible. But it's even worse than that. Because for the first year you were paying. That's the total cost to you. Because you paid 3,000 pula in the first year. And you still owe them now, I'm guessing, and these figures are roughly correct, you probably owe them now 8,000. And you've been listed with a credit ratings agency as a bad payer, and you won't get a bank loan. Because when you go to a bank and say, I need a car loan, they'll go tickety tick tick to the TransUnion website or the VeryCredit website, and they'll say, you owe the furniture store 8,000 pula. You're a bad credit risk, we're not lending you money. And it will take you, if you can't afford 250 pula a month, how long is it going to take you to pay off 8,000? It'll take years. That's the cost of store credit. For something that was worth 1.5, you're going to pay in total, if it goes wrong, if it goes right, you're going to pay twice as much. If it goes wrong, you're going to pay that much. The lesson of store credit is really simple. It's tremendously simple. And forgive me for putting it very simply. Kate and I have spoken to I don't know how many people who are now poor. People who started in their first job, Things were looking good. And they're now poor, unemployed perhaps, years of debt recovery in front of them, and they still don't have a sofa. Nothing even to sit on in their misery. Store credit is possibly the worst decision, the worst financial decision anyone can make. Please, I beg you, don't. The solution is simple. The solution is to do what our mothers told us, which is really boring. Our grandmothers told us, save. Don't borrow, save. Typically, if you save the money, put money aside, instead of borrowing on credit, put the same amount that you would pay into a savings account. Instead of paying over 2 years, with a little luck, you only have to save for about 9 months, because the bank will give you a little bit of interest as well. And on a good month, you put a bit extra in. Less than a year, you can save up for something that will cost you 2 years to buy, and then you own it. It's yours, and no one can ever take it away from you, because you bought it for cash and you possess that thing. Buy second-hand. There's nothing wrong with buying second-hand. Look in the advertiser, the expat leaving column. Look on Facebook, there's all sorts of second-hand sites on Facebook of people leaving. Expats who've come here, they're going away now. They're selling cars, refrigerators, laptops, all sorts of things that are they're a year old. So it's not maybe as glamorous as you might want, but it's not going to make you poor. The problem with all of this is that all of these laws we have, the Consumer Protection Act, the Consumer Protection Regulations, the Food Control Act, the Public Health Regulations, all these things, they're fantastic. I urge you, when you get a chance, maybe it could be done here at school, go to the government website, the laws website, elaws.gov.bw. You can read all of the laws online. If you haven't done this already, it's elaws, elaws.gov.bw. The website's a bit crude, but the laws are there, and you can do a search and search for keywords and things. Go and read the Consumer Protection Regulations. Go and read the Penal Code, it's fascinating. Go and read all the other things. They're written in really simple English. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand them. Anyone with a basic command of English can read them. You guys will eat them up. We can give you a list of the ones you should read. They're well written, they're easy, and then the best thing you can do is go into a store if they're giving you trouble. That cell phone store that's giving you a hard time because they say it's water damage. You heard that one? It's water damage, we're not fixing it. Well, they have to prove that it's water damage in writing. The Consumer Protection Regulations demands that. You can't make a claim without justification and proof. If they say, oh, you damaged it, prove that I damaged it. They are the ones that have to prove that. And the best thing you can do is go in with a copy of the Consumer Protection Regulations, smack it down on the desk and say, read that. Look at section 13.1a. It must be of merchantable quality. Look at 15.1a. You've got to deliver a service with reasonable care and skill. Go into a store when they're giving you a hard time with a copy of those regulations, and I bet you they'll go, oh, okay. Have a new phone.
It is now time for a review on the stock market performance with the Botswana Stock Exchange.
Good evening. Let's take a look at last week's equity market figures. We start with the Domestic Companies Index, DCI, which was up 0.25% from the previous week, whereas the FCI, Foreign Companies Index, was up 0.05%. So there was definitely a bit more movement of counters on the foreign board than there was the previous week. Total turnover for the week was 69.8 million bula, a daily average of 17.4 million bula, and the total number of shares traded was 23.2 million. If you look at year-to-date statistics from January to this point, the DCI has been performing quite well with an increase of 15.4%, whereas last year at this point it was only up 6.4%. The Foreign Companies Index is down 1.32%, whereas last year at this point the decline was twice that amount at 2.1%. Total turnover for the year is 1.8 billion bula, a daily average of 7.2 million, and the total number of shares traded this year is 570.9 million, whereas last year it was just about half of that at 251.9 1.4 million. So there's definitely a substantial improvement in the performance of our local bourse this year. Thank you very much.
It is our hope that you, the viewer at home, now fully understand that items bought through hire purchase do not belong to the consumer until the very bitter end. That whether damaged or repossessed, one will still be expected to pay any outstanding balances and penalties. As we continue our exploration of this matter in the following weeks, we will seek out responses from members of the retail fraternity, as well as experts that can help us better understand the legal and ethical implications of the system as it stands.
I've had a problem with my MP3. My mom bought it in the States from Best Buy, but it said a warranty of 1 year, and then like 3 months down the line, the screen fell off, and then it started being all fuzzy and everything, and then it like sometimes it would change the song automatically without me pressing it. So, and we couldn't take it back because it was all the way in America, of course, and so I don't know what went wrong there.
How do you control imported products such as foods, and how do you know that they will not threaten consumers?
So I wanted to know if there are any laws that actually govern how things are being priced in the country, because like you mentioned, with higher purchase you'll find that the consumer is paying way more than the cash price. So is that right?
You said for the in-diplome law that you always pay back the money that you borrowed, but what happens when there is an inflation or a recession? Does it affect the interest rate?
Until then, have a good night and pleasant viewing.